Hi everyone, welcome back to the Watch Insider. My name is Brian. I'm joined tonight by Tim Masso, and thank you for logging on. Back in the saddle after a 2-week hiatus, and it feels good.
Yeah, we got some great watches on the table tonight. A little bit of everything. Straps, bracelets, sports watches, dress watches, complications, simple watches. Let's get started. Where do you want to launch off?
Let's launch off with a watch after your own heart. And this was a watch that I saw sitting in the drawer that was just begging to be spoken about. So put it on the wrist. It felt absolutely awesome. Here we have a Sinn 104 featured on a brown calfskin strap. Stainless steel watch, features a day and date complication. What first drew me to the watch was the loom syringe hands. I just think that I'm a sucker for syringe hands, and pretty much anything that has them I just seem to like. The watch has a amazing fit and feel. When you told me that it was 41 millimeters, I absolutely could not believe it because it actually felt like a 39 millimeter watch on the wrist. As far as a tool watch is concerned, I think that it's, if you're looking for something that's a good value, good price, off the beaten track, and something that most people won't know, this is a really good option.
And it's a fun watch because the 104 in a lot of ways echoes the case lines of the EZM1 and the EZM11, and you can really see from that angle how the lugs are taken directly from Sinn's signature watch. I love the fact that bezel, lug, case profile, it's very similar, so you can see the design DNA of the great one, but you also have a little bit more versatility than I've got with my EZM11. For one thing, the day-date complication is universal. Popular just about everywhere. It's the everyday complication. There's a bidirectional rotating bezel, which I always find is easier to read than a chronograph, and it's a countdown bezel, so you've got the ability to time something up to 60 minutes, and the thing about chronographs is that you generally just get a 30-minute register. Now, at 47.5 millimeters lug to lug, you can see that this watch is easy to wear. You've got the captured or captive bezel profile, so you're not going to snap that one off. It's held on by screws, and it's a timepiece that's also swimmable, a rarity for a pilot's watch. Turn it all over, and you can see Sinn used a high-grade 2824 base, so this is a very impressive and accomplished watch that is, as the case back declares, 200 meters water resistant, and that, again, is just not common in pilot's watches. On the wrist, it's an easy one to accommodate. Sub 48 millimeters lug to lug. The watch is strong, but the watch isn't terribly strident. Any wrist can accommodate this watch. I would say down to about 13.5 to 14 centimeters circumference. It's also a relatively thin watch at under 12 millimeters thick, so you can wear this one with a cuff. And it's sober enough with the black and the white two-tone coloration that you could make it a dress watch as well. Now, one feature about this watch, let me quickly get it out of the date-changing danger zone. The watch has a bilingual calendar, so it actually has the calendar for the days in both German and English, whichever you please. Of course, this is a product of Frankfurt, Germany.
So, awesome watch. The only thing that I don't know if I'm feeling 100% is the brown calfskin strap. To me, I would almost want to see it like on one of those like nylon sail type straps that Blancpain does. Does Sinn do a strap like that?
I don't believe they have a strap exactly to that description.
They should if they don't.
They do have textile straps, though. If you wanted something that looked 90% the part, they've got that.
Okay.
Plus, you can always go aftermarket.
Yeah. So, moving right along, and guys, please feel free, ask any questions you may have about watches on the table or watches in general. Wednesday is a live show because we want to, talk to you, the viewer.
Want some controversy?
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking a Rolex. That's a gem.
Let's do it.
All right. This is my
We've
favorite.
got some blinged out Rolexes.
This is my favorite day-date since the Maltese Falcon, and it is a monster. This is going to divide opinion. The watch is discreet, the watch is monotone, it's all grayscale, and yet it is also sensational with diamond-paved lugs, diamond-set meteorite dial, white gold Arabic numerals, and a traditional 36mm size. I don't know if the watch is discreet, extravagant, or somehow both at the same time. When you throw it on the wrist, the icy look of the watch, with the gems melding alongside the iron of the dial, and the white gold of the case, you could miss it at first glance, and the camera does exaggerate the presence of the gems. As you move out, and Harrison, we have Harrison in here? Yep, we got Harrison. Harrison, zoom out a little bit so we can just see what this watch looks like at arm's length. It actually becomes pretty discreet and subtle until you get close, and then those lugs are truly exquisite. The channeling that's used for the placement of these factory diamonds is, first of all, handcrafted. Second of all, very rare. And it's uncommon to find a Rolex that is both so rare you'll never see another example and features tangible handcrafting in this day and date.
And, you know,
Pun
one thing
intended.
I want to do real quick, have him focus on the dial real fast, because something that most customers don't realize is no meteorite dial is going to be exactly the same. And there are really good meteorite dials, and then there's dials, you know, I don't want to say that they're not good, but you can really tell when one is a good one. And to me, like this one having like the thick streaks, it doesn't have a lot of black in it. Like it's just, you can just tell that this was a good dial.
Yeah, Rolex is exceptional at partially oxidizing the dial and then essentially stating it, so creating those Widmanstatten pattern cross streaks and the overlapping crystalline oxidation and then freezing it in a stasis for eternity. Rolex does that better than anyone, which is why they are the longest practitioners of the meteorite dial, as well as the most notable. It's because the consistent quality on a product that is never identical from unit to unit. Plus, if you look at the dial, there's also a lot of white gold.
Quick, Harrison, zoom in and zoom out.
We can do that. A lovely piece.
People in the chat are loving Harrison tonight.
By the way, guys, this watch has never been refinished, and I consider that to be a major selling point. Everything down to the original metal and the intact caseback Jubilee sticker. You can see that Rolex Jubilee interlocking logo with the reference of the watch. This one is a P series, so the year 2000, and that is a remarkable survival rate. These old Rolex watches tend to get sanded down to toothpicks, and that one is exempt. Lovely piece.
Okay. What are we thinking next?
Well, let's go with Patek.
Okay. So I brought this watch on the show really just to, A, show off a cool Calatrava because I didn't think that I'd been bringing enough of the Grand Comps on the show, but B, really to highlight the value of a watch that you can get right now relative to what's going on with some of the other sports watches. So here we have a Patek Philippe 5496P. I believe this is the 001 dial, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think this is the 010.
Is it the 010 or 001?
I think it's 001. Okay, so let's talk about the dial.
Score one for Brian.
Yeah. Well, on the other hand, we could talk about what happens before the show.
Exactly. So here we have a brush finish dial. The watch happens to be one of the larger dress watches that Patek Philippe makes. And I think that it's the type of watch that you could really dress up or dress down based specifically on the strap that you're choosing. And to me, these types of watches right here, especially Patek Philippe's retrograde perpetuals that they've made for so long, that they're probably, you know, the watch will probably be phased out. And it actually was discontinued, I believe, this reference. Just offers a collector a great opportunity to get into a watch right now at what I think is a really good price.
You don't see a whole lot of these. The watch came out in 2011, as you see it right here, and it's a nice size at about 39.5, 39.4. It's also a flat, broad, and unusual perpetual calendar for a couple of reasons. First, there's the aperture calendar and the use of a retrograding date. Second, this is one of the few Patek Philippe perpetual calendars that uses a center rotor automatic based on the caliber 324. So this is an exceptional watch, both technically and aesthetically, and you'll note the nostalgic, vintage-inspired snapback case. That's not something you see commonly on any modern Patek watches anymore. The timepiece is nice and slim to it, under 12 millimeters thick. It has a nice, strong, if simple, case band. I think the strength of this watch is on its dial, where you have that vertical satin finish. It's a little bit like the dial of the 5235, but again, it's just unconventional because of the tri-aperture day, leap year phase, and month, along with the retrograde system and the crescent moon phase. It's a dial that manages to be exciting but not busy or crowded, and very well balanced for a perpetual calendar. Plus, if you look outboard, those cabochon minute and seconds hashes are absolutely exquisite, and they lend another focal plane and a glisten and a glint to the dial. That's a fun piece.
It is fun. And I've seen a lot of folks actually put them on like brown suede straps and make them more casual, and I think that it completely changes the overall look and the feel, because it's got a lot of heft, and it's by no means a small watch. It's actually quite interesting. Like
it's broad and it's flat.
Exactly. And I think that when they came out with the 5905, which obviously is 42 millimeters platinum, it's larger, it's thicker, this was the watch at the time that if you wanted something that was larger and a little bit bigger, you went with the 5496. And I think that the 5905 took a little bit of the pizzazz away from this being that sort of large obtainable piece. That wasn't a Grand Comp.
It's hard to say. At this point, I can't say I can think of any really complicated Patek Philippe watch that's super hot at the moment. The 5320 is a very cool watch. I just feel like all the energy right now is in the sports watches, which makes almost all the complications a buy. And I'll also say this, although some folks like the applique rose gold numerals on subsequent versions of this watch, this is probably the most versatile, because with the all-white metal aesthetic and the grayscale aesthetic, you can really dress this one up or dress it down as you suit. So that's a watch that has a lot of potential to change gears, whereas I think something with more rose gold elements becomes a bit more pigeonholed.
Right.
Let's talk about a watch that's not a perpetual, but perhaps even more interesting.
So this is a watch I actually brought on the show a long time ago. And again, another watch that I saw that was being worked with, and I had to bring it back on. So here we have a FP Journe 38 millimeter calendrier. This was actually a limited edition for Sincere watches out of Singapore with a dark mother of pearl dial. So for those that are watching that don't know a lot about FP Journe, the calendrier was discontinued many years back. You know, Journe is no longer doing a annual calendar. He is doing a perpetual. If you look to the back of the watch, you will notice that the watch has a rose gold movement. So calendriers were produced with the brass movements, and then they transitioned into the rose gold movements, but they weren't produced with the rose gold movements in 38 millimeter case in that larger quantity, because while these were being produced, the 38 millimeters were actually dwindling down, really because of demand. Folks really weren't interested in purchasing the 38 millimeter watches. That's obviously since changed as the demand for 38 millimeter watches have grown. But you've got the rose gold movement here, and the watch is honestly just freaking amazing. I mean, I actually, the video does not do it justice, specifically the dark mother of pearl. And what's so nice about the dark mother of pearl is that when you're wearing the watch, it almost has, depending upon the light, almost a flat effect where it's not really showy or ostentatious, but when you move it at different angles, like the real just glow and depth really begin to show.
Yeah, the use of black Tahitian mother of pearl on this watch does give it a sort of holographic three-dimensional quality, almost as though the dial has depth. It looks as though you are glancing into a storm cloud in the distance. It has a depth that you won't find on any enamel or lacquer dial, and I usually talk about those as being bottomless. The watch, of course, discontinued in 2014, is a special piece for three reasons: the black Tahitian mother of pearl, the 38 millimeter case, and the discontinued reference. Now, the funny thing is, people always want what they can't have. What does a Ferrari 575 with a 6-speed have over a Ferrari 575 with a electromechanical system? Well, back in the day, everyone ordered the automatic. Today, everyone wants the 6-speed. And it's the same thing with the 599s. And Journe is exactly like the car market. The watches that people didn't want initially or didn't buy in volume are now the most, eagerly sought. The timepiece is also wonderful because of its size. Let's not overplay the appeal of the dial. From about 5 feet away, the dial becomes quite discreet. You can see, turn it to the right angle, it almost looks blacked out. So what this watch has going for it is a universal size that anyone can enjoy. And the heft of the full rose gold movement in the platinum case makes for an exceptional feel on the wrist. It truly does have the mass of something far larger, even something like a precious metal Royal Oak 41. It feels that large, even though, as you could see, it is nowhere near testing the limits of my wrist on either side of the lug. This is a universally wearable watch. I'm not going to prescribe a lower limit for wrist size because, frankly, I think anyone can wear this watch with panache. And if you've ever held a movement blank for a Journe with the rose gold caliber, it's like holding a $1 coin in your hand. The rose gold that goes into making the bridges and plates has incredible mass by itself, more than some entire watches.
And what I particularly like about this watch as well is that on some of his gem set dials, and I mean, again, it depends on the particular configuration of the dial, it depends on what stone is being used, but the ability to create such a complicated mother of pearl dial with the cutouts and everything that goes on here and have it be one piece.
I bet there's a high rejection rate for those. I know he hates to talk about his special dial watches.
Yes.
Because it gums up the works. He owns his own dial factory, so he has to deal with the problems that causes. So, for example, the Jade Tourbillon, they told me at the factory he doesn't like to talk about it. I'm like, why? It's the most interesting version of the Tourbillon. They're like, it's a pain in the butt to make. We break the dials all the time. It slows down the process, which is why you want the Jade Tourbillon, or you want the mother of pearl. Also important to note, that watch is mechanically exceptional. In addition to the annual calendar with the retrograde, it also has a 5-day power reserve, though if they're honest, they'll admit that it'll run for 7 days, but it has a 5-day chronometric power reserve when it keeps good time. So interesting stuff. And if you note, the rotor on this watch is not quite full case back, and that is because it was designed slightly off-center to accommodate modular movements on the other side of the caliber. So if you've ever wondered why these rotors don't fill the full case back of a Journe watch, it's because the 1300 caliber was designed from the beginning to be a modular complication base, and that meant offsetting the rotor. So now you know.
Okay. So guys, please ask some questions from the audience so we can have something to talk about while we're talking about these watches.
Let's talk about a watch that a friend asked about a few days ago.
Oh, beautiful.
So this is a watch that I'm lucky to have on the show, so I can refer him to the show as a reference. But this is a Rolex watch that you just don't see too often, because most people who want a white metal Daytona will pay $24,000 to get the steel one at double retail. When the reality is, this is probably a better long-term investment, as these watches tend to sell between, I guess, $33,000 and $35,000, and I see that pretty close to their depreciated value. This is a timepiece that clearly is understated. If you want to show off your gold Rolex, then frankly you want this, and well, that's
Boom.
The end of the discussion. But if you want the kind of stealth wealth that comes with a watch that looks like steel but feels like $1 million, then something like this is a little bit more apt. This is the 116509, and as you can see, it is a lovely and lush sort of modern day take on the Panda dial. It's not a pure silver, it's sort of middle ground between slate and silver, which gives it a greater intensity, almost like AMG Alubeam or Audi Avis Silver. If you're familiar with car colors, it's like silver with balls. And then you've got the contrasting registers, the red Daytona script, and those lovely polished chapter rings inboard of the registers. You throw this on the wrist, and it's a 40mm watch, true, but with these solid end links, it just feels a bit broader across the wrist. This is a timepiece that has a lot of presence, a lot of persona, a lot of charisma, and at only 12.2mm thick, it's also a great match for a shirt cuff. So though it's 100 meters water resistant with a 3-day automatic power reserve and fully loomed, this can be your dress watch. So for the price of it, which, you know, of course is going to be over $30,000, you get a watch that you can wear all the time in every situation. And if you want to get really daring, get a rubber B or Everest strap and then change the look of the watch. So a wonderful piece, but understated. It's really a connoisseur's Rolex. I don't think the guy who wants a full gold Rolex immediately envisions this watch.
Yeah, and I mean, the dial configuration of this watch, which is, I believe it was new last year or the year before, is absolutely spectacular. They use the same dial on the Oyster Flex version that has the ceramic bezel. And I think that Rolex transitioning from the crocodile strap into the Oyster Flex completely changed the way that the precious metal Rolexes were viewed, both on a strap and even on a bracelet, because nobody can deny how awesome this watch is. And the fact that this bezel is now white gold is completely differentiated from the stainless steel version. I mean, you immediately know what this watch is, and I think that that was one of the...
If you know Rolex,
If you know Rolex, you now know that
watch.
this is not steel. And I think that that was one of the best pieces of them moving towards the ceramic bezel for the steel pieces. But I also think that if you're not used to a white gold watch and you sort of wonder, why would I get a white gold watch if I have a stainless steel watch, or I can get a stainless steel watch? I think, number one, you know, you haven't had, you know, felt perhaps the heft of it, of a white gold watch, but it's a completely different wearing experience.
Well, I would even say that a Rolex white gold watch today, with the solid end links, the solid gold case back, the fully milled clasp body, the solid center links in the bracelet, this feels like what a Rolex Platinum watch was a generation ago. Like when you had a full Platinum date 8 years ago, it felt like this. And today, this is that substantial. Not just that it feels like a Platinum Rolex from the past, but this feels as solid as a full bracelet Platinum watch from other brands in modern manufacture, in current production. It's that impressive. Rolex dials, very, very good. They're on par with Grand Seiko. I'm going to give them credit for that. But the highlight of that watch is the feel. Eyes closed, you know it's special.
So why don't we talk about the Vacheron here, and then we'll come back to the Rolex and the Omega that's on the table. So I bring a Vacheron overseas. I think it must feel like now like every third show. This is one that I haven't brought on. Here we have the Vacheron Generation 2 So not the current generation of the Overseas, but the last one. Stainless steel, titanium bezel, crocodile strap, time-only automatic. You've got the ability to transition the croc to a bracelet and or a rubber strap. And again, I still think that from a sports watch perspective and how often you actually see them on people's wrists, this watch still represents one of the best values in the entire industry, bar none, from a pre-owned perspective, in getting yourself into a brand like Vacheron for a watch that you can wear all the time, every day, and in the water, and just something that overall looks absolutely awesome. They're effectively, I mean, again, you can get them pre-owned for as much as what less than what a steel Daytona trades for in the secondary market.
And it's also important to note that you're getting a real high horology tandem. You're getting a JLC movement on the inside, and then you're getting the Vacheron finish, the Vacheron heritage design with cues dating back to the 1977 222. You've got that element of a titanium bezel, matte finished, and then the polish of the steel case in juxtaposition with the satin finish of the lug hoods. So you have three different types of finish. You have media blasted, satin, and polish. You have two different metals between the titanium and the steel, and then you have the mixed material junction at the lug with the alligator leather strap and the steel. When you turn the watch to its dial side and you look at just how deep and rich that dial is, you've got the dished Rayhaut, you've got the white gold quarter Arabics, you've got the white gold applique indices and the hands, and then an explosive sunburst that, as with the Rolex, isn't silver, and it isn't exactly galvanized black either. It's a very strong, striking, and nicely titanium cued slate, and it matches the titanium bezel perfect and really plays on the cues to expand the presence of the titanium, making it appear as though one material runs from bezel corner to bezel corner, and that's all down to the tone of the dial. Now, the watch is very, very tough. First of all, these are 150 meters water resistant.
Hold on 1 second. We have a question coming from the audience because I am absolutely eager to answer this question.
Okay.
What is the water resistancy on the original 3700 stainless steel from Patek?
On the original 3700?
From 1976.
First of all, I would say today it's 0. Mm-hmm. But effectively, it's gonna be somewhere between 100 and 120 since the beginning. I don't think they started rating it initially, but I do believe that because later examples of it were rated to 120, that the first ones, which were constructed identically, were probably the same. Okay. Like if you think of that case construction later on with the 3710, for example, or the 3700s that came off the line last. Mm-hmm. Those were essentially 120 meter watches. But again, this is one of those things where there's 120 and then there's a vintage 120. I'd be happy if that watch in the modern day and age just passed a 30 meter water test. Wear it conservatively.
Nowadays, too, what I know to be common course for those watches is if a 3700 is going in for service, and they cannot correct the water resistancy, there's too much wear to the case, or for whatever reason, they will replace the case in order, because they will not, or you'd have to refuse service and they won't service the watch, so they do need to be able to get it to current standards.
Yeah, that's when you send your watch to a vintage specialist and you skip the factory service. When they're talking about doing a case replacement, forget it. No one needs to swim with a Nautilus 3700. It is a 120 meter watch, but again, so much of the official rating of a watch ebbs through the years as seals age, as the dimensions of the case change through service. It's just things that it's not worth the risk. There's so many other watches that you can take swimming for a fraction of the money, and a vintage investment grade watch like a 3700 should just be at best splash resistant in the modern age. If it can go through a water test that a dress watch would pass, I would be very happy.
Yeah, but if it goes in for service and Patek services the watch and gives it a warranty, they are attesting to the water resistance of the piece. Now, I don't know if that means that you should or should not bring it in the water, because again, if moisture does get inside and you have an original dial and it does damage the watch, there's not much. They're just going to do a dial replacement. There's not much that you can do. Yeah, but they are testing it for water resistancy before it would leave.
Major component replacement for me is the kiss of death for a classic watch. Like, if I can tell that major parts of a vintage watch, like maybe not some old like Wittnauer, but like a really important watch whose value hinges on its originality, that's why I tell people with their old moon watches, don't send them to Omega. Whatever you do, in God's name. Someone who didn't get the memo will polish the watch, someone will replace the hands, someone will replace the dial, and they'll send it back to you looking new. Which might be fine for like a 2005 Cartier tank, but not like a pre-moon. So that's the lesson. You will get a good watch, as Brian says, and they will attest to its water resistance, but it will not be the same watch. And that's the point I would emphasize. That's why people who just service vintage watches exist. One more thing about this watch. I really like the fact that they made the most of a non-display caseback. This is an underrated art form. A lot of times when you have a solid iron inner cage like you have with this to make it anti-magnetic, there's just no way of showing the movement. So how artful and thoughtful the caseback design is really has a bearing on how appealing the watch would be. How much thought did they put into it? Note outboard that there is a concentric circular brushing. Inboard of that, there is a radial lapping machine grain that emanates from an imaginary center point that would be roughly under the ship's main mast. And then inboard you could see that the waves are polished and relieved, and then there is a frosted base behind the ship that represents the sky. The ship itself is all polished and relieved, and it represents the Amerigo Vespucci, which is an Italian naval training vessel. That was the image basis, or the likeness basis for this ship. So with 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of finish on the caseback, real effort and imagination made this an appealing watch on both sides. And the lume is great.
Awesome. And Mark S., please keep the questions coming. Next time I might just give you my cell phone number and you can text them to me during the show. So if I miss it in the chat, we will hit it right away. Okay. Why don't we talk about this piece, because I think that it's really special.
Yeah. It is.
And it's not something that comes in every day. So, well, I guess I'll hold it up. So here we have a blue side of the moon, blue ceramic watch from Omega, and it's got the aventurine dial here. So aventurine was probably here, I'll let you hold it so I can talk. So if I'm pronouncing it correctly, aventurine was probably the dial of 2019, I would say. It was one of those things where you saw one brand do it, and then next thing you know, every single brand has theirs. So AP did it. Hermes, we've actually talked about it right after SIHH. We talked about their double moon, which was absolutely beautiful. And, here we have it on an Omega watch. But to me, I think that almost no brand does it justice the way that Omega does the watch.
I would also say that Omega was a bit ahead of the curve. If you can remember the original Beta 21 powered Omega Constellations of the 1970s with their aventurine dials, and then significantly for the Moonwatch and the Moonwatch family, in 2010 the Moonwatch Moonphase aventurine came out and really laid the groundwork for this watch. This was a 2018 release that took the basic blue side of the moon from 2 years prior and created a much more compelling package. Now it feels like this is a complete idea. The blue ceramic case seemed like a attempt to string out the gray side, the dark side series, the white side. This was an iteration until the dial was added. Then it very much became a complete thought and its own watch. It's
like magical, this watch, almost.
Well, this is the only watch with a dial more compelling than that Tahitian mother of pearl Journe. The thing about this watch is that it really does fit the theme. You have that image via the aventurine mineral of a sort of endless depth of cosmos below the moon phase on a moon watch. So thematically, it's a wonderfully consistent aesthetic. The only problem with this watch is 17.4 millimeters thick, which I actually find okay given how much you're getting with the watch, the moon phase, the aventurine dial, the ceramic case, the 60-hour power reserve, the twin barrels, the coaxial escapement, the vertical clutch column wheel chronograph. I'm actually okay with this, but it is a big old watch. Now, the advantage being all ceramic is that it has the weight of like a 41, not a 44.25, which it is. So a lovely piece, and you can see it's also nicely constrained across the wrist, not nearly as broad as a conventional 44 plus would be. This is right around 50 millimeters and very wearable.
So we have a couple commenters thinking that the dial would look better in steel. Hard to say. I mean, I think it's also hard to, with the way that the lighting is, I think that it's also, the blue ceramic looks brighter through the video than it does live, and it matches the dial better, when you're holding the watch in hand. It would probably also look really good in like a dark gray titanium, would be really nice. We have Mark S wants to see the back of the watch.
I had a question, and
this is Mark S's show now, everybody, just so everybody knows
I do have an answer to a question from one of our live chatters who'd asked us if we honor mistaken pricing on our website. Look, guys, this is not Delta. We're not going to put up like a $10 transatlantic fare and then honor that. If a $10,000 watch is advertised for $500, no, obviously we're not going to honor that. That was a mistake. You know it's a mistake. I know it's a mistake. And in good faith, we're going to give you the best possible price while still avoiding catastrophic losses on the watch. What we will do is back the watch up with a no questions asked return policy. When you get it, you can tell me buyer's remorse, I'm sending it back. That's the promise we make. Condition, warranty, and no questions asked return. But again, if there's a Patek Phillipe on our site for like $700, that's a mistake, and we're gonna fix it.
And I actually think it was listed at $0. I think it was listed at $0.
Yeah, so
the mistake.
If there's a free watch on our website, the answer is no. Okay, good stuff, guys. Real quick, though, I want to compare the relative size of the blue side with my EZM, just because the EZM's a 43, and guys see it all the time, and I think folks have the wrong idea about the 44 of the Omega. As with my EZM, it's a really short watch lug to lug, and I normally wouldn't wear a 43 or a 44. I can wear both of these watches. There you go. And that's the case back. It's not super exotic, but hey, everything descended from the great 8500 is an impressive movement. That's the 9904 twin mainspring barrels, skeletonized bridge so you can see the column wheel, free-sprung balance bridge, and full bridge structure. And of course, it is a coaxial with a silicone hairspring, amagnetic. Okay. And look at that. Why? Because they can. A contrasting stitch on the back of the strap. There's a red contrasting stitch, but only on the back of the strap. I love it, and I love the gusset that's sewn into the strap to prevent it from gouging. Omega, you never disappoint. Even if, frankly, this year's novelty rollout did disappoint. Not the watches, the approach. Okay. Rolex.
Okay.
Back to Rolex.
So I think this is the last one on the table.
It is.
Okay.
So remove the fingerprints.
Please.
It's an epidemic of fingerprints tonight. It's bothering me. You know, before I do the watch reviews, I actually wash my hands 3 times to take off all the finger oils. And so that's the kind of thing I do for you guys. You can see my immaculately manicured fingers because I did a manicure today. And presenting this lovely 40mm rose gold 2018 to present GMT Master 2. It is the bee's knees, the first ever rose gold GMT Master 2. What makes it, though, is not the rose gold. It's the bezel.
So here we have, as you mentioned, this is the rose gold Rupiah watch. Came out several years back. You know, it's actually I believe it's the last GMT Master 2 on an oyster bracelet, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you can still get the white gold Pepsi with a meteorite.
Oh yes, you can get the white gold Pepsi. So the precious metal pieces still are on oyster bracelet. But this is a watch which I see a lot online, and I rarely see the watch in the wild, which to me is always interesting when you're online and you're on social media and you consistently see the same watches over and over and over again, and you almost begin to feel that everybody has these watches. But then when you go out into the wild, you rarely see them, and again, I think that's one of the small phenomena of the watch industry in general. But this is an example of a watch that I really do feel like I rarely get to see it in the flesh and out and about.
Well, there's a reason for that. The greatest challenge for this watch is the two-tone CHNR.
Yeah, and the watch I think was beautifully executed. I think that there's a lot of rose gold with brown in the industry, and it was nice to see them go with the black dominant dial with the black bezel, and then having sort of the brown accent there, I think was done really, really nicely.
It is a very handsome and subtle watch. The difference, the gradiated difference between the case and the red of the bezel is wonderfully subtle, and I think that this watch is just so rich and opulent that it is that opulence that appeals to the buyer of this watch. Not that it's a better value of the two-tone CHNR, because it's not. Simply because it's always going to be a scarcity, and among Rolex watches, especially core Rolex models, that is a really special distinction. Like, there are not many Rolex GMT watches that you can say are going to be the only one in your office if you have one.
Correct. No, and I can appreciate that Rolex is now, differentiating the solid metal pieces, with the bracelet. We talked on the last show 3 weeks ago how the Jubilee versus the Oyster is now differentiating the sub versus the GMT, and I think that it's actually a great move on their part to differentiate between the lines.
And it does create a much beefier aesthetic. First of all, they sweated the details here. I love the Root Beer Rose GMT Master 2 script, but then it's also the simple fact that with the 3-link Oyster design, this feels like a sportier watch than the Pepsi or the black and blue on the Jubilee. So this is a watch that has a more aggressive, outsized personality, and not necessarily because of the gold, because of the bracelet and the mass and the heft that it adds. It's a really different visual impact and signature than the Jubilees, and it is a good way to differentiate between them, because if there's anything about solid gold full bracelet Rolex that I consider to be a little bit of a weak point, it is the fact that the subscription rate is often lower because folks feel like they can get the same Rolex status and stature with a full steel watch. If you change the look of the watch by also changing the bracelet when you change the metal, then you create a little bit more exclusivity and
Like what they did
design.
with the Daytona.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So, unfortunately, that's all the watches that we have on the table. I guess I'll do a quick wrist check here to end us off because somebody from the
I aligned the bezel. Do you feel better
asked. So, I've got here I'll let you show it off, a Patek Phillipe 5980 1A in stainless steel. My date is not set, honestly, because I just did not have a pusher handy and I didn't feel like going all the way through. The time is set, though, which is nice. Watch has, seen better days. But again, I've had it for 5 years now, and I had the watch before it was a thing, and I'll have the watch, I'm sure, well after it's a thing. So, of all the watches that I think I would never sell, this is definitely one of them. And it's still a watch that it probably gets the most wrist time of any watch in my collection, and I've rarely found another watch that I just enjoy the look and feel of it as much.
It is a wonderful piece. I think it's a great one-watch watch.
Yeah. So.
And I take that comment back. That'll be a bezel replacement, not a case replacement.
Yeah. And I still don't know if I believe them when they say, though, that you can always just keep the chronograph hand running. So, I mean, that was a thing with this watch, was when it came out, is that you could keep it running.
You can. You absolutely can. That's legit. That's a vertical clutch. And you kind of need to, otherwise it's sort of a dead dial.
Yeah, and that was my only thing with the watch was the, the sort of the dead dial. But you know what? I'm going to keep it running now.
And it's a flyback chronograph.
Yeah. Okay. So, guys, that's all that we have for tonight. I really appreciate everybody logging back on after the 2-week hiatus. As always, please feel free, email me if you have any questions. Mark S., I'm going to give you every mode of sort of contact that I have, my wife's email, my wife's cell phone, my email, my cell phone. So if you have any questions, we're on it.
And Dan, if you're watching, that's the white gold Daytona.
So my name's Brian, this is Tim, this is the Watch Insider, and thank you all for logging on.